New tariff rates for dozens of countries.
For a lot of business owners, the future is still very much uncertain.
Canada will only sign a deal which is a good deal for Canada.
As of right now, 7 of the most important suppliers in the United States are moving the vital components of our economy, such as fighter jets, metals, hospitals, medications, and even the coffee you drink, away from the ports of the United States and into the hands of Canada. These billion-dollar agreements have rewired trade routes to make Canada the preferred partner in North America. Due to the fact that Canada is locking in the future while we bicker over the present, the outcome is rising costs, empty shelves, and a steady erosion of America's industrial edge. Will we understand this before the gate closes? The 7th spot goes to China, the revolution in rare earths. Consider the following scenario. A shipping container is loaded with rare earth minerals that were once used to power American technology. However, rather than traveling across the Pacific to California, the container is now destined for Vancouver. This is the first stop in Canada's new billion-dollar rare earth processing deal with Beijing. China's export controls did not come about overnight. What started as targeted restrictions on rare earths and dual-use technologies has evolved into systematic redirection of critical materials away from American buyers. Chinese exporters now face layers of bureaucracy when shipping to use. Companies export licenses that take months instead of weeks. Restriction lists that make suppliers nervous about American partnerships. It is a heartbreaking tale that the figures convey. As soon as China tightens the spigot on the United States of America while simultaneously opening floodgates to Canada, American manufacturers feel the effects of this. China controls approximately 60% of the worldwide rare earth mining and 85% of the processing capability. Companies that manufacture electronic goods in Silicon Valley have reported delays that have lasted for quarters. Automotive manufacturers have production bottlenecks as a result of the scarcity and increased cost of essential components. But this is when things start to go from bad to worse for the United States of America and Canada. Despite the fact that Chinese suppliers reduced their sales to American buyers, they did not decrease their output. They discovered a more hungry customer just across the northern border of the United States of America. The newly signed agreement between Canada and China for the processing of rare earth elements, which is worth $1.2 billion, establishes an entirely new supply chain that fully circumvents American companies. Long-term supply contracts, technology transfer agreements, and Chinese investments in Canadian processing facilities are all part of the arrangement. These agreements guarantee that Canadian manufacturers will have preferential access to commodities that American companies can no longer reliably source. Now that they have secured access to the minerals that fuel modern devices, Canadian technology companies who were once competitors with Silicon Valley have a significant advantage over their competitors. Give some thought to the consequences for the strategy. Inputs for industry are not the only use for rare earths. In terms of national security, they are assets. Batteries for smartphones and missile guidance systems are only 2 examples of the many applications that require them. When China moves these goods from ports in the United States to facilities in Canada, they are not simply switching trade routes. The Canadian Prime Minister's office announced the deal as cementing Canada's place in the global green energy transition. They are shifting the balance of technological power in North America, which is a significant development. Nevertheless, the underlying message was very clear. As the United States engages in trade conflicts, Canada is forming trade relationships. At the same time that American businesses are struggling with supply chain uncertainties, Canadian manufacturers are securing decades of reliable access to essential resources. The repercussions are seen in every sector of the American manufacturing sector. Manufacturers of electronic goods are confronted with increased expenses and lengthier delays. Concerns concerning supply chain security are important to defense companies. Companies in the clean energy sector observe their Canadian counterparts gaining cost advantages that might last for decades. But then the domino effect intensifies as other countries take notice of Canada's performance. In the context of commerce, Chinese authorities have referred to the collaboration with Canada as a model for relationships that are stable and mutually beneficial. When reliability becomes a competitive advantage, the aggressive trade posture of the United States becomes a strategic liability.
This is the implicit contrast with the erratic trade policies of the United States, which could not be more easily understood. However, China is not the only country that is isolating us. A move has just been made by India. And last, India, the treachery of the textile industry. The calls started rolling in throughout the month of February, but they were no longer directed toward customers in the United States. Indian textile makers, who were once dependent on us, were receiving queries from Canadian corporations promising something that American purchasers were unable to obtain: stability and partnership rather than sanctions and uncertainty. India's $1.8 billion textile industry. An agreement between Canada and the pharmaceutical industry represents more than just a change in the flow of trade. The move represents a significant realignment of one of the greatest manufacturing economies in the world, moving away from the markets in the United States and toward the prospects there in Canada. Factory floors that were formerly buzzing with activity making clothing for American department stores began retooling for Canadian brands in the booming garment districts of Bangalore and Chennai. These manufacturers were producing clothing for American department stores. Because of the higher tariffs imposed by the United States, the cost of Indian clothing for American shops increased by 25%, while Canada provided special trade terms that made Indian items more competitive than they had ever been before. Ravi Sharma is the proprietor of a textile business that in the previous year employed 800 workers to produce clothing for American brands. According to him, after 20 years of cultivating connections with American brands, his whole production line now serves Canadian merchants who have locked in supply agreements for a period of 5 years. This is in contrast to the situation in the United States, where buyers were hesitant due to tariff concerns. However, Canada delivered what the United States was unable to give. The government of India anticipates that new levies will affect 55% of the country's exports to the United States. It's not just about fabrics either. Pharmaceuticals, information, technology, services, and manufactured items are the most important things that American consumers rely on a daily basis. On the other hand, while the trade policies of the United States penalized Indian exporters, the trade negotiators of Canada were making the exact opposite pitch. Canada and India have reached a bilateral agreement that includes provisions for the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, partnerships in the information technology service industry, and textile production that is aimed primarily at the North American market. There is a guarantee that Indian enterprises will have access to Canadian consumers without incurring tariff fines, and Canadian merchants will have access to dependable suppliers who will not be subject to abrupt policy corrections. Those in the United States of America should be especially concerned about the pharmaceutical aspect of the transaction. However, Canada's new cooperation involves investments in pharmaceutical facilities in India that are expressly geared to suit the needs of Canadian healthcare. India is responsible for producing over 40% of the generic medication supply in the United States. Buyers in the United States are facing decreased capacity and increased pricing as a result of the expansion of manufacturing by Indian manufacturers focused on Canada. This is the point at which the betrayal is most painful. These Indian enterprises are not new to the market and are competing with American-based vendors. These are the same manufacturers, the same facilities, and the same knowledge that once propelled supply chains in the United States of America. The only thing they are doing is catering to Canadian clients who provide more favorable conditions and more dependable partnerships. The agreement was presented by the Minister of Commerce of Canada as a means of constructing the supply chains of the future. These supply networks are based on the assumption that the American market is too volatile to anchor long-term economic strategy. This attitude is echoed by Indian textile executives, who describe Canadian collaborations as being similar to what American connections used to be before politics got in the way. The network effects accelerate beyond the realm of textiles and pharmaceuticals. Indian information technology companies who are a part of the Trade Pact are building operations in Canada that are in direct competition with IT services provided by the United States. Agricultural exporters from India are rerouting shipments of spices and tea from ports in the United States to distribution facilities in Canada. However, the human cost becomes more personal for American households who relied on inexpensive imports from India. American shops are scrambling to find replacements to Indian suppliers, but the options are more expensive and deliver less consistently. When obtained from foreign countries, the shirt that used to be sold in American department shops for $15 now costs $22 more than it did in the past. As Indian manufacturers prioritize orders from Canada, the generic pharmaceuticals that helped keep the cost of healthcare in the United States low become increasingly rare. When you penalize your suppliers, why should you be shocked when they find consumers who appreciate their value? Every Indian manufacturer that shifts from American to Canadian customers is another supply chain breach that American businesses can't readily fix. This is because when you penalize your suppliers, they find customers who appreciate their value. And at this very moment, the beating heart of the global electronics industry is shifting. Number 5. Malaysia. The exodus of electronics. Malaysian shipping containers that were once automatically destined for Los Angeles and Seattle are now waiting in queue at the rapidly increasing port facilities in Vancouver. The reason why Canada's trade agreement with Malaysia, which is worth $900 million and involves electronics and palm oil, offers something that are no longer offered by American markets, is that it provides welcome mats rather than tariff walls. In the beginning of this year, Malaysian manufacturers temporarily halted shipments that were headed to the United States due to tariff confusion. Electronics manufacturers, which are essential suppliers for American technology companies, also halted production lines that were destined for the United States market while lawyers decoded new regulations. However, what started out as a temporary pause eventually became a permanent one. It is impossible to overestimate the significance of Malaysia's involvement in the global electronics industry. Malaysia became a permanent pivot when Canadian trade officials arrived with checkbooks and collaboration ideas. A wide variety of electronic devices, including smartphones and automobiles, are powered by the semiconductors, circuit boards, and components that are manufactured in this country. In the event that Malaysian suppliers shift capacity away from American consumers and toward Canadian markets, they have repercussions that are felt throughout the entirety of the American economy. With that being said, this is where Malaysia's pivot becomes strategic. Canada's trade agreement does not solely involve the purchase of Malaysian goods. It does this by investing in Malaysian capacity that is expressly tailored to service markets in North America through distribution networks in Canada. A number of provisions are included in the agreement, including Canadian investments in Malaysian semiconductor facilities, collaborations for the exchange of technology, and logistics networks that transport electronic goods from Asia to Canadian ports in order to reach consumers in North America. While Canadian wholesalers become the preferred gateway for Asian electronics, Malaysian manufacturers are guaranteed access to North American markets without the uncertainty of American tariffs. It is important to consider the opportunities and challenges that this presents for the competitive landscape. It is now necessary for American sellers of electronic goods to compete with Canadian businesses that have privileged access to Malaysian suppliers. Canadian technology companies also have the ability to obtain components at lower prices and with greater dependability than their American counterparts. Unlike their American counterparts, Canadian manufacturers enjoy the benefits of a stable supply chain, whereas American firms struggle with component shortages and price instability. There is an additional layer of Canadian advantage that is added by the palm oil component of the arrangement. Approximately 39% of the world's palm oil is produced in Malaysia. Palm oil is a key component in a wide variety of products, including cosmetics and food items. In spite of the fact that the trade deal between Canada and Malaysia ensures preferential access to Malaysian palm oil, American food makers are forced to contend with increased costs and supply uncertainty. The Canadian collaboration was highlighted by the Malaysian Minister of Trade as being an excellent example of how modern trade ties ought to be structured, a striking contrast to the unpredictability and antagonism that Malaysian exporters encounter when dealing with the policies employed by the United States. Executives in the Malaysian electronics industry have described in private conversations how relieved they are to have a dependable North American partner who does not alter the rules every election cycle. The implications of the network extend beyond the realm of direct trade. In order to create innovation partnerships, Malaysian firms who are a part of the Canadian arrangement are establishing research and development facilities in Canada. These facilities would have previously been located in Silicon Valley or other American technology centers. In the process of strengthening supply chains that purposefully exclude American participation, Malaysian investments in Canadian infrastructure boost such supply chains. However, the human consequences of these investments affect American workers and customers directly. Workers in the United States who manufacture electronic goods saw their Canadian counterparts gaining cost advantages that they are unable to match. When compared to their Canadian rivals, American technology firms have a difficult time sourcing components that are both reliable and affordable. Consumers in the United States are paying greater rates for electronic goods as supply chains are reorganizing themselves around distribution networks in Canada rather than in the United States. There is no room for error in the mathematics. Because when you make yourself a difficult customer, suppliers find easier customers to serve Canadian ports that once handled overflow from congested American facilities. Every Malaysian supplier that switches from American to Canadian customers represents a lost economic opportunity that American businesses may never recover from. This is because when you make yourself a difficult customer, suppliers find easier customers to accommodate. Now engage in direct competition with Los Angeles and Seattle for trade with Asian countries. Containers from Malaysia that were previously routed automatically through the infrastructure of the United States are now specifically targeting Canadian networks because they provide more favorable terms and less unpredictable service. It is impossible to overstate how clear Malaysia's message is to other Asian exporters. There are several things that Canada delivers that the United States of America does not anymore. Partnership rather than punishment, stability rather than upheaval, and long-term partnerships rather than political instability. After that, your cup of coffee in the morning is caught in the crossfire. Number 4, Brazil, the coffee coup. The aroma that once wafted from Brazilian coffee shipments bound for American ports now fills Canadian warehouses as part of a $1.5 billion agricultural trade deal that fundamentally reshapes how North America sources its caffeine, and much more. Brazilian coffee exporters woke up to a nightmare scenario: a USA tariff of 50% on one of the most beloved imports in the United States. Brazil supplies approximately 35% of the United States coffee beans. Suddenly, the foundation of a coffee business that is worth $45 billion in the United States has been thrown into upheaval. However, while coffee roasters in the United States were struggling with arithmetic that was hard to solve, trade negotiators from Canada were making an offer to Brazilian exporters that they simply could not reject: dollars. The bilateral deal between Canada and Brazil does not simply involve the purchase of coffee. Rather, it establishes an integrated supply chain for coffee in North America that purposefully removes the participation of the United States. The agreement calls for the participation of Canadian investors in Brazilian processing facilities, the transfer of technology for the manufacture of premium coffee, and the establishment of logistics networks that will route Brazilian coffee through Canadian ports in order to service continental markets. Contemplate the implications that this has for the way you start your day. That Brazilian coffee that was once sold in grocery stores and coffee shops in the United States is now primarily distributed to distributors in Canada. These distributors determine the amount of Brazilian coffee that is distributed to American consumers, if any at all. Canadian coffee roasters are able to obtain premium Brazilian beans at prices that are competitive, while their American competitors are forced to pay penalty tariffs that render their products uncompetitive. As a result of American tariffs, they were forced to make the decision to inflict a 30% penalty on South African automotive parts, which overnight turned profitable relationships into economically disastrous ones. The American tariffs, on the other hand, created business mathematics that was impossible to solve, and the Canadian trade negotiators created partnership opportunities that were impossible to resist. Meanwhile, South African automotive manufacturers in Johannesburg and Cape Town were confronted with the harsh reality that car parts that cost American automakers $100 last year. In a sector where profit margins are measured in single digits, the price has now increased to $130. This is not an increase in price, rather it is a notice of termination of the relationship. Canadian automotive companies, on the other hand, filled the void by entering into long-term supply agreements with South African manufacturers. These agreements offered South African manufacturers what American customers were unable to predict: profitability. The Canadian deal includes investments in manufacturing facilities in South Africa that are specifically designed to serve the automotive markets in North America through supply chains that are located in Canada rather than in the United States at this time. South African manufacturers are able to gain guaranteed access to Canadian automakers while simultaneously developing production capacity that can serve American consumers through Canadian subsidiaries. In essence, they are able to use Canada as a tariff-free gateway to markets that have been made directly inaccessible by American trade policies. On the other hand, the automobile components industry is merely the beginning of South Africa's shift toward cooperation with Canadian companies. The mining component of the transaction ought to be quite unsettling for technology companies in the United States. There are some of the largest quantities of platinum, palladium, and other precious metals in the world that are located in South Africa. These precious metals are crucial for the production of electronic devices, vehicle catalytic converters, and renewable energy systems. The trade agreement between Canada and South Africa ensures that Canada will have preferential access to South African mining output, while American manufacturers will be subject to penalty pricing and supply uncertainties. Take into consideration the strategic consequences for the competitiveness of the American industrial sector. Platinum from South Africa, which was once used to power the production of catalytic converters in the United States, is now primarily used by refineries in Canada to supply the continent's markets. Palladium from South Africa, which was used by American electronics manufacturers for component production, is now used by Canadian technology companies to provide cost advantages over their American competitors. According to the South African Minister of Economic, the collaboration between Canada and South Africa is a perfect example of how modern economic ties should be able to ensure mutual benefit without any intervention from politics. South African industrial executives privately express relief at having a North American partner who sees business as business rather than political spectacle. The agricultural component adds another layer of Canadian advantage. South Africa supplies wine, citrus, fruits, and specialized foods that American consumers respect for quality and cost. Canada's trade agreement secures preferential access to South African agricultural products, while American food importers struggle with penalty pricing that makes South African products uncompetitive. But then the network effects reveal how quickly entire industries can reorganize around non-American partnerships. Canadian automotive companies gain access to South African manufacturing expertise and supply chain reliability that American competitors can no longer access affordably. South African investment in Canadian facilities creates integrated production networks that serve North American markets without requiring American participation. Canadian mining firms form alliances with South African operations that secure essential mineral supplies for Canadian rather than American industrial demands. The human cost strikes American automotive workers and customers directly. American auto manufacturers confront component cost increases that make their goods less competitive compared to Canadian counterparts. American electronics companies struggle to source precious metals as South African producers favor Canadian customers who provide better terms and more solid ties. South African wine and citrus exports, which used to fill grocery stores in the United States, now predominantly flow to wholesalers in Canada. These distributors meet the needs of both Canadian and cross-border American markets, and they frequently charge premium rates that are a reflection of the trade obstacles that the United States has imposed on itself. As a result of South African agricultural exporters redirecting capacity toward more profitable partnerships in Canada, American restaurants and specialty food shops are facing inventory issues. The arithmetic are devastating for the competitiveness of the American manufacturing sector. Every time a South African supplier moves their business away from American customers and toward Canadian ones, they are giving up cost benefits, decreasing the stability of their supply chain, and incurring greater manufacturing costs, all of which may never be recovered by American businesses. The Industry Minister of Canada made the announcement that the South African Pact will secure Canada's position in global supply chains. This viewpoint is one that purposefully excludes the involvement of the United States of America and assumes that the trade policies of the United States are too unstable to warrant long-term industrial planning. The message that South Africa is trying to convey to other developing countries that are wealthy in resources is that Canada offers partnership and profitability, but the United States gives fines and political meddling. Finally, the precision that once drove the industries of the United States of America has found a new home. Number 1. Switzerland. The precision exodus. The Swiss precision that once powered American manufacturing excellence now serves Canadian industry exclusively thanks to a $1.3 billion technology and luxury goods deal that represents perhaps the most devastating blow to American industrial competitiveness in modern trade history. A 39% tariff on Swiss goods doesn't just affect numbers on a balance sheet, it dismantles relationships built over generations and redirects some of the world's most advanced manufacturing technology away from American factories and toward Canadian facilities that welcome Swiss excellence instead of penalizing it. When American taxes added $3,900 to a $10,000 clock, Swiss watchmakers, whose names are synonymous with luxury and precision all over the world, were confronted with an impossible mathematical challenge. Swiss luxury manufacturers, however, have found a solution that should worry American shops. This answer is exclusive distribution agreements with Canadian partners that service both Canadian and cross-border American markets at premium pricing. Instead of absorbing losses or abandoning North American markets, Swiss luxury manufacturers have found this alternative. Another industry that offers an even more catastrophic narrative about the competitiveness of American manufacturing is the machinery sector. It is now nearly 40% more expensive for American buyers to purchase Swiss precision equipment, which includes the tools that American factories use to manufacture a wide variety of products, ranging from medical devices to aerospace components. However, Canadian manufacturers are able to acquire the same equipment at prices that are more competitive thanks to partnership agreements that treat Swiss precision as an asset rather than a liability. As part of the bilateral agreement between Canada and Switzerland, technology transfer partnerships have been established. These agreements provide Swiss industrial experience directly to Canadian facilities. An investment from Switzerland in precision manufacturing in Canada results in the creation of production capabilities that can serve markets in North America without the need for participation from the United States. The American firms who compete with Canadian manufacturing are seeing their cost advantages evaporate while Canadian manufacturers gain access to Swiss innovation. Nevertheless, this is where the most clever component of Canada's trade strategy is revealed by Switzerland's sudden shift in position. In addition to serving Canadian businesses, Swiss financial services, banking technology, and precise manufacturing capabilities are also available to other businesses. They generate benefits for Canadian enterprises that cannot be matched by American companies. Trade financing is provided by Swiss banks that establish operations in Canada. This type of financing is more beneficial to Canadian international business than to American international commerce. Swiss technology companies that choose to form partnerships with Canadian companies rather than with American companies create innovation networks that exclude American participation in the luxury goods component of the deal. This should be a cause for concern for American retailers who have built their business models around the exclusivity of Swiss brands. Swiss watches, precision instruments, and luxury products now flow primarily through Canadian distribution networks that control access to North American markets. As a result, American retailers face reduced inventory access and higher wholesale costs, while Canadian competitors secure exclusive relationships with Swiss luxury brands. A description of the Canadian partner was provided by the Swiss Precision Manufacturing Association, a strong rejection of American trade partnerships that consider Swiss superiority as a target for penalty rather than collaboration. Partnership as the future of steady technology transfer is a subject of contention. Swiss executives have expressed their satisfaction in a private conversation about the discovery of a North American partner who is aware that precision production necessitates the establishment of predictable connections. There are consequences for the pharmaceutical and medical device industries that go beyond the immediate benefits of trade. Companies based in Switzerland manufacture cutting-edge medical equipment, pharmaceutical ingredients, and biotechnology items that are utilized by healthcare systems in the United States to provide patients with innovative treatment techniques. On the other hand, American healthcare providers are subject to penalty pricing and supply uncertainty as a result of the trade deal between Canada and Switzerland, which guarantees preferential access to Swiss medical breakthroughs. The network effects, on the other hand, demonstrate how rapidly technological leadership may be transferred from the hands of Americans to those of Canadians. Swiss precision manufacturing expertise that establishes operations in Canada produces innovation centers that compete directly with technology hubs in the United States. Investments made by Switzerland in research and development facilities in Canada draw talent from around the world that would have otherwise been situated in industrial areas in the United States. Through partnership agreements that do not include American academic institutions, Canadian universities are able to acquire access to the technological competence of Switzerland. The human cost of this access is devastatingly felt by American consumers and workers in the manufacturing industry. Companies in the United States have a difficult time acquiring Swiss precision equipment at rates that are competitive, which hinders their capacity to compete in international markets. American luxury retailers watch Canadian competitors gain exclusive access to Swiss brands that define market segments. Swiss mechanical watches, precision instruments, and luxury goods that once filled American retail stores now command premium prices that reflect America's self-imposed trade barriers. American manufacturers face equipment cost increases that make their products less competitive compared to Canadian alternatives that access Swiss technology without penalty fees. The mathematics are unforgiving for American industrial competitiveness. Every Swiss technology collaboration that opts for a base in Canada rather than the United States implies a loss of prospects for innovation, a reduction in manufacturing capacity, and technological advantages that the American sector may never be able to regain. Asserting that the United States trade policies are too unstable to warrant a long-term technological relationship, the Canadian Minister of Technology hailed the Swiss arrangement as a means of securing Canada's leadership in precision manufacturing and luxury markets. The deal also purposely excludes the participation of the United States. The message that Switzerland is sending to other countries that rely on innovative manufacturing could not be more apparent. The United States of America provides tariffs and trade instability, whereas Canada provides technological partnership and market access. When the most precise manufacturers in the world choose your neighbor over you, the message is not subtle, it is Swiss precision applied to trade ties. Every contract that is inked over our heads brings us closer to a future in which the United States of America is not the core of its own supply chain. At what point are we on the verge of the edge? Please subscribe to our channel and participate in the discussion below. If you found this video to be enlightening, if the United States of America were to lose its nearest neighbor, it would not only be a diplomatic failure, but it would also be a generational failure.